Guys, let's look at 1312. I want to make sure that you get some differentiation here with what this problem is all about. If we have a product, it has costs associated with it. So understand that we're in the cost accounting chapter. So we are right here with product cost trying to differentiate what that is as compared to period cost here in the third column. So product cost, you'll see here, can be either direct or indirect, and then period cost is not separate from product cost. But notice that either one of them, right, period cost or product cost, could be variable or fixed, kind of like the discussion that we had before about cost behavior, if you will. Now, tape used to secure packed boxes, remember, it's a part of the product, but how much tape we're using and how many come off the end of the line, that's kind of what we consider an indirect cost, but it is variable, notice here, because tape, how much you're using depends on how much product you're making. Plant janitors' wages, they have here as an indirect product cost, which would be correct if the janitor is working, notice, in the plant. Okay. Now, if they had had office building janitors, then it would be a period cost. But notice that plant janitors' wages could be fixed or could be variable. And this is one of those that very well could be a mixed cost. For example, you've got a janitor coming in, they're going to come in anyway. They're going to be there to clean up. It doesn't really, matter. But then again, you might have janitors, even more janitors, or maybe you're getting overtime to janitors if they're making more product. So if they're making more product, they're making more mess. So the janitor comes in. So it could be a sort of a situation where this is a mixed cost, like we've talked about in previous chapters, where a portion of it would be fixed, but a portion of it then variable. You'll see here inventory clerk's wages. Now keep in mind that inventory is already finished, it's been made, and you're just keeping up with it. And if you're paying an inventory clerk wages associated with that inventory, then how much you make and how much they're keeping up with very well may be a variable cost. But it is a period cost. Be clear that that's distinction. Product's already been made, it's already been packaged up, and it's already been sent to inventory. And when it is, it's kind of a warehouse expense, so to speak, right? And so that is an administrative kind of expense, is what we consider that, especially at the level that you're learning in this particular problem. Now, promotional expenses is advertising, guys, and that's always a period cost. And you're going to spend X amount of dollars on social media, or you're going to spend X amount of dollars on flyers to go out in the postal. Are you going to spend X amount of dollars, maybe printing something up? And so if you're doing that, you're spending a fixed amount of money on that. And so advertising is almost always a fixed expense, and it always considered a period expense, and has nothing to do with the product, other than the fact that the product is what you're selling. Production workers, that's a direct cost to the product, you'll notice, and it goes up and down as to how much product you make, so it's variable. And production supervisors, however, remember, look at this, they have fixed, but they're also indirect. The supervisor is going to be there regardless of what kind of production you're making. So production supervisors are considered an indirect cost. But they are a product cost, guys, because you can't have production workers without supervisors. So it makes sense to you. Now you'll note sales force commissions is a selling expense. So selling expenses are considered period expenses. They have nothing to do with the product, and they are variable, right? Because salesmen don't get paid unless they sell the product, because these are commissions. Now, maintenance supplies, we are going to make an assumption here that they are maintenance for maybe the production line. So any kind of machinery you may be using, or even janitors may be using, some kind of maintenance supplies that they're using, then that would be considered an indirect cost of the product, and it may be variable to how much product you're making. An assumption that is being made here, guys. Maintenance supplies used, depends on, keep in mind your production level, and maybe the maintenance schedule for your equipment and stuff. So the controller salary, who's going to record all these transactions, is going to be considered a period cost or administrative type cost. So that's usually fixed, right? And it's a period cost. Now we have electricity costs for an office building. Now we're going to assume that administration is in that office building, and that electricity, however, could be variable, or a good bit of it could be fixed. It just really depends. It's kind of a mixed cost. And I want to just tell you real quick, if I could, guys, that this situation with an office building next door, and I want you to realize that if we had an office building next door that had some office space for the production supervisors, then some of that square footage very well could be prorated into the product cost, because the production supervisors, depending on the product you're making and the system that you have, of course, it could very well need an office space. And if they do, it could be in the office building next door, not in the actual factory. So if that were the case, then you may prorate that cost. So I just want to make you aware of that. And that cost has variable components to it and fixed components to it. So if you look here, real estate taxes are going to be an indirect cost because they are for the factory, and they are usually fixed. The government say you owe X amount. And then real estate taxes for the office building we're putting in the period category because we're differentiating them from the factory and assuming that they're administrative and they are fixed. Okay? So I just wanted to make you aware of the differentiation between all of these costs, guys, and that you make sure you completely understand this before you move forward. It'll be easier for you on the test to kind of distinguish between A, B, C, or D in some of those multiple choice questions. I'm going to scroll down here to 1316. And here they've asked us to calculate a predetermined overhead rate. Right? This is some kind of a manufacturer. Let's see, it's Nautical Footwear. Is that who it is? Yeah. And they have an estimated total overhead cost. Now understand that this is $487,200 is a total amount of overhead. Now I want to just, coming off of that other problem, I'm going to tell you that overhead is what we call indirect cost. So we often will apply indirect cost to the production according to a certain rate. And in this case, we're using estimated machine hours. So we got 33,600 estimated machine hours. We're dividing into that total overhead cost to get a $14.50 per machine hour predetermined overhead application rate. Don't get too tongue twisted, guys, on these terminology. But you got to kind of understand that what we are doing is we're going to apply our overhead based on this particular rate. Now they give us these pairs of shoes that are being produced, and they give us these numbers, like we're going to use this amount of raw materials and this amount of direct labor. And I want you to get and understand that raw materials are easier to calculate as you put them into the product, and direct labor is easier to calculate as you put it into the product. But overhead is much, much harder because it's all these indirect costs that are just kind of flowing into your whole entire accounting system, and you're having to kind of shuffle a little bit to sort of keep up with how much we want to apply into work in process in order to kind of have an estimate of what our costs are going to be. So manufacturing concerns do this all the time, sort of projecting cost with sort of an estimate. And I want you to realize too that this total overhead cost estimate and this estimated machine hours are not actual. They are estimated. That means they're coming up with these numbers based on experience. So I put in green here the raw materials and the direct labor because they give you those numbers. And then overhead is calculated based on that $14.50 machine hour. And you got to calculate this number here to get the total manufacturing cost. And if you take that cost and divide it by the number of pairs that are produced, then you get a per cost per pair. Okay. Now, what I want to tell you is that the problem actually mentions the word absorption, right? It says calculate the predetermined overhead application rate that will be used for absorption costing. Now I want to make sure that you're clear, and we'll cover this, but this $16.80 does include an estimate for overhead. And that overhead kind of may have a variable component, may have a fixed component. But that's why we call it absorption costing, because that means it includes some fixed cost in that cost. So that's all that means. So the term absorption just means that there's some fixed cost in there that's kind of mixed in with the variable. And so we have an absorption costing rate here, and then we are applying it per pair of shoes here. Now guys, if you take that cost per pair and you multiply it times the inventory that they give us, then we can get a cost for our inventory. And then we can also figure out, well, if we had that many in ending inventory, then we must have this much that we've sold. So if we come up with easily $16.80 per pair, we can come up with a cost of the shoes that were sold. So this is the cost of goods sold here in this particular problem. Just letting you know, it's pretty easy, straightforward problem, but I kind of wanted to start you out with these because it's something that you got to kind of get your head around in the chapter, get beyond, and I think you can once you kind of hear me talk about it, hopefully.